and welcome to Synthesized Sunsets. Today we are joined by Lillian Wang Selonick, a short story author and essayist who contributes to literary substacks like The Republic of Letters and Futurist Letters. Lillian first came to our attention with her article Worldbuilding, which talks about the so-called genre ghetto of speculative fiction. In this article, she argues that gatekeeping of genre should go both ways. While it is great that literary critics are finally more likely to view speculative fiction as serious literature, this does not mean that any literary fiction with sci-fi tropes should be considered serious science fiction. She also writes retrospectives on classic sci-fi at her Substack, The Lillian Review of Books, including Robert Heinlein and Philip K. Dick. So, Lillian, we first wanted to ask you about this world building article, and I wanted to give like a little bit of context. So, this article was originally written, if I'm not mistaken, as a response to this much earlier post by Lincoln Michel from like 2017 called "Against World Building," which made some people kind of angry. So, I was wondering if you could give a bit of context on how this article came to be and the context surrounding it.
Yeah, so first of all, it's great to be on Synthesized Sunsets. Thanks for inviting me. So while the essay World Building ended up being kind of a response to Lincoln Michel's 2017 article, it it didn't really start that way. So I got a message from Sam Khan, who is the editor-in-chief of Republic of Letters, and he was, I guess, reaching out to just lots of Substack writers, trying to drum up content right when he launched the magazine. And he asked me initially to write about what the current moment in literature is, or what the literary movement is that characterizes the current moment. And I said, I'd love to be involved in Republic of Letters. It sounds like a cool project, but I really don't read enough contemporary literature to, have an opinion on that. So I threw out a couple other topics. I was like, if there's some other thing you want me to write about that's more in my wheelhouse of either like Jewish literature, ancient Greek classics, or science fiction, uh, I'd be happy to contribute. And he ended up coming back to me with, well, what's this whole world building thing? Why am I hearing about it so much? And I had incidentally been involved in a club in college uh, called World Building, where we all just sort of sat around and dreamed up a fantasy sci-fi world to write stories in. And so the topic appealed to me, and that's how I ended up writing the story, or the essay. Sorry. Yeah, so I guess that's how I started writing it. But the one of the major touch points was Lincoln Michel's essay, because I remembered stumbling across it just out in the wild, and being sort of amused by how angry it seemed to make a lot of people. I think this idea that you need to engage in this rigorous, sort of highly engineered construction of a fictional world in order to write good science fiction or fantasy has become this like kind of rigid dogma in the last 10 or so years. And yeah, I think Michelle's argument that it's actually overused and can be counterproductive sort of resonated with me.
Yeah, I think one point that was amusing in this article is that even authors who are held up as the best examples of world building often do not themselves actually follow all of the current recommended conventions for this. In fact, this like very rigorous craft for world building has kind of like expanded beyond the work of what the people who actually inspired it were doing. Um, but I also think it's true that world building has kind of also expanded beyond literature, right? Like I would say in high school and stuff, I probably knew more people who were into world building than writing stories. Only the outlet for their world building was just like, I mean, mostly like tabletop RPGs. But then some people would even just world build, just because. Like I knew this one guy who wanted to make a language, and so he just made this conlang, but then he needed to have a world for this conlang to develop in, and so he just made the world for the conlang, but he didn't write any story. Like it was just like purely world building exercise. And I'm guessing that wasn't really like a hobby in the same way like in the past, even though I'm sure some people were definitely doing this.
That's really cool, actually. I don't know, as a like teenager to have the, I don't know, wherewithal to just go about and make a language. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I just have weird friends, but I feel like I came across like at least three people who did this. But anyway, I think that, well, yeah, what do you think, Gordon? Do you think world building is kind of like overused as a concept when talking about like fantasy, especially?
Yeah, I think there's an extent to which, like especially if you're building a world for D&D or something, it needs to have a certain amount of rigor because your players could kind of go anywhere or do whatever. But like if you're building a world to set a story in, you don't really necessarily need like the same amount of rigor because you can decide where the plot goes, right? Like you don't have like to have some like country on the other side of the world to be like fully fleshed out and like actually exist. You just need like some character to make a like passing comment about it. And yeah, I think there's like a bit too much like, oh, you need to have like everything like completely fleshed out when a lot of times it's cool for stuff to just be kind of fuzzy and mystical and in the air a bit.
Mm. And this kind of gets at the distinction that Lincoln laid out in his article, which is like between world building and like world conjuring. Do you think you could describe a little bit about like what he meant by that?
Yeah, I think the so world building has these sort of rigid connotations, like you have this definite structure and everything is sort of laid out and named, and it's like, I don't know, it's like the Aristotle of like fiction. And then world conjuring is more like just giving the key details that evoke what that world would feel like. It's, you know, it's more like the creating a vibe rather than a system, I think. Um, you know, more like the Plato of fiction uh, here. And yeah, I think that's, I forget if I used this phrase in my essay, but my personal approach to world building, I think, is closer to that world conjuring that Lincoln talked about. I like to I like to think of it as the reader should be looking through the keyhole of a door into a room, and through that keyhole you can only see, you know, a certain amount of the room, but it should feel like the rest of the room is there. And so I think the author should know what is in that room and, you know, how everything is arranged. But I do think it takes away some of the, you know, enjoyment if the author puts, you know, tells you everything that's in that room, instead of just letting you get a glimpse of it and sort of like fill it in for yourself.
I did want to read like a passage from the article and like ask you some questions about it. So, in your article, you wrote, I've read a handful of these hybrid books, and while I enjoyed many of them, most of them trigger my latent sci-fi nerd hackles. They each incorporate speculative elements, but none of them read like speculative novels. These authors, on the whole, fail to engage with the rich tradition of speculative fiction, instead choosing to sprinkle in sci-fi tropes and premises that they absorb through osmosis and Black Mirror exposure, rather than learn through the obsessive study of Asimov, Herbert, and Clarke. As an embittered old head, I bristle at how sci-fi tropes are used as seasoning on otherwise bland literary plots. These books fail as speculative fiction because they don't strike the right balance of world building versus world conjuring, to use Lincoln Michel's term. So I definitely agree with the general sentiment here, but I just want to ask you, like, what would you say is a sign that, like, as you say, an author actually did learn about speculative fiction through the obsessive study of Asimov, Herbert, and Clarke, as opposed to Black Mirror?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. I thought you were going to ask me to like name names, um, and be like, these are the specific books that I thought sucked. Um, okay, well, I mean, this might be cheating because it's like widely recognized as like hard sci-fi, but the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, the Three Body Problem. I just recently reread the trilogy, and so it's sort of fresh in my mind. And there are like constant little like homages to like golden age sci-fi, uh, where he'll okay, now I'm totally blanking on like the specific references that he makes, but I remember like going through and being like, oh, he's talking about, Asimov's robotics, or like that's a clear reference to a space elevator from Arthur C. Clarke, or something like that. So yeah, I think I do feel like that's interesting in a different way, because he's engaging with like the Western tradition of sci-fi while creating this distinct uh, Chinese science fiction. But yeah, I guess I don't I can't really think of any other contemporary books that I've read recently that where I've thought like, oh, this author seems to have really, prayed at the altar of um, the greats, the sci-fi greats. I guess do you can you think of
Oh,
examples of?
yeah. Well, what I was gonna say is that I do like appreciate it when someone is. It's clear to the text that someone is really into expanding on some technical concept, which I think is definitely true in Remembrance of Earth's Past. Like there are some parts where you're just like, ah, this author really wanted to like say these particular thoughts about like dimensionality, um, and I think that there like sometimes I think sometimes I feel like you can kind of tell that like oh yeah this person is like a true enjoyer of science. I think in this other Chinese book like Waste Tide by Chen Fan, like there's this one part where he's just kind of like going off about cellular respiration or something in a way that is like kind of unnecessary, and I don't even think this makes it like a better book always. Like I think in this case it maybe made it like a bit worse of a book, but you're still just like, ah, like, this person enjoys like science as well as fiction. And I also think that in the past, science fiction was more part of the overall like popular science ecosystem. Like people were into popular science, then they were also into science fiction. These were kind of like the same people. Whereas I think now, first of all, popular science isn't that big of a hobby anymore compared to how it used to be. But also, I feel like there's less overlap. In fact, the most technical people in society right now are not reading like modern sci-fi as much. And so I guess that's kind of the biggest thing that I look for is like, oh, does this person seem like they actually like science?
Yeah,
But of course, oh, go ahead, Gordon. Sorry.
or yeah, I was gonna say just one thing I kind of feel alongside this is sci-fi's sort of become a bit too defined by its tropes. Like its tropes are kind of too good on some level. Like it's very easy for someone to want to add like robots or aliens or time travel or space flight to their story because these are all like very cool. But then it's just like you could have some normal literary story and then just like toss in some time travel and it's like suddenly like science fiction or something and gets nominated for a Hugo Award. I mean sort of throwing shade here at Ministry of Time from this year, but just in general like I feel like just adding a specific trope doesn't really, or at least shouldn't really, make something science fiction. Like there needs to be some amount of, I don't know if rigor is the right word, but like actual science sort of. But yeah, I think as of now, just like if you say someone like the genre science fiction, they kind of just think about the tropes and nothing else.
Yeah. Have you guys read Flux by Jin Chang, or heard of it?
I don't think
Um,
I've heard of this actually.
okay, yeah, it came out a couple years ago, and I think he's Korean Canadian author, and I read it last year, or I like listen to it audiobook, which I don't normally do. So it was a little, I'm not sure if my reaction to it was like tempered by, being in an unusual format for me. Um, but it is one of these books that that was definitely like marketed as like, oh, this is literary speculative fiction, and I was intrigued, especially because Korean author. I'm Korean American, and so want to like support the culture and all that. But it's yeah, it ended up being like there's this element of time travel where it's this young man who is working for this like mysterious tech company that may or may not have invented time travel, and he like ends up in this weird loop. And there were parts of it that I thought were like really well done. It really ended up being more about sort of like 90s nostalgia for uh, like bad TV shows, um, which was an interesting element. But the yeah, I don't know. It's something about it. I think if it had been written 10, 15 years ago, it would have been just that and no time travel. But then now, as the gates are opening up, it's like, well, why not? I'll dabble in this trope, um, which I think it really like it ends up being a fine book, but there is something about it. Like I got a weird chip on my shoulder about the stuff. Where I don't know if you guys feel this way ever, but it's just like, man, stay in your lane. Like you got all of literary fiction, like stay out of my little sandbox. But um I don't know.
Right,
That's
right,
me.
yeah. I mean, we've kind of been roasting Ministry of Time like more privately than publicly, like a bit. And I think like so this is like pretty clearly like a literary romance that's like has time travel, and so as such it's like on the Hugo Award ballot for best novel. And I think what we both find especially frustrating about this is that it's won like all kinds of literary awards. Like it doesn't even need the Hugos. Like it clearly has like its own niche. And like in my mind, like part of the point of an institution like the Hugos is to give a place for these other works that would not receive that kind of attention in like the mainstream literary establishment. And so I'm kind of just like, why is it necessary to like platform this book, especially since it's like not really embrace, like, sure, if it was actually just like science fiction, then sure. But yeah. Another
Yeah,
thing
Or
we've
if it
been
was actually like really, really good or something. Like
okay,
if it was
sure.
never
Or
let
if it's really, really good.
if it was never let me go or something, like I'd understand a bit, even if it's like still like more literary, but like yeah, this book I was just like, ugh, there's
Yeah.
just like not really ideas there. Yeah.
also I read The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead while I was writing the world building essay, because I was like, I don't know, I was feeling a little weird about like name checking all of these books that were sort of like the crossover uh, genre without having read all of them. um, and yeah, it was a great book, but it's also like, why did this win the Arthur C. Clarke Award? It's like, I don't, have you guys read Underground Railroad?
I have.
Yeah, it's like it has the really just like the barest of speculative, where it's like, okay, what if the Underground Railroad was a literal railroad? And it's like, okay, cool. But then, it also won like the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. It's like you don't need the Arthur C. Clarke Award too.
Yeah. Amended criteria for this award is like if you win a Pulitzer, you can't be nominated in this category.
Yeah, like what's the point? Like,
Yeah, I believe Yiddish Policemen's Union, which we talked about before the call, also swept like all of the major sci-fi awards. And it's just kind of like, I guess we can do that, but I think I did want to talk about. So we've been talking about how like science fiction and speculative fiction. There's sort of like the more academic, technical definition of these terms, and then there's also how people use these in practice. And so I think like me and Gordon both agree that sci-fi, like we think that academically it is just kind of about like an interest in science and like the outgrowth of that exploration of scientific concepts. But in practice, it's more just used to describe what works with sci-fi tropes, like you were saying, like robots, spaceships, aliens. But we didn't reach quite as much of a consensus about speculative fiction, which I think is a bit of a harder term to pin down. So, in your mind, what would be like the academic use of speculative fiction, and then what would be how people actually use it in practice?
I guess I think of the term speculative fiction as being like more of a catch-all. Like science fiction is a subset of speculative fiction, and so yeah, I guess I think of speculative fiction as being like, oh, this is a form of literature that asks, what if something was different in our like universe that would and then whatever world grows from that. And so that could be anything from, you know, sword and sandals fantasy to hard sci-fi. Sometimes I get stuck on the term speculative because the way that I was introduced to it was, I think it was much later in my development. Like I got really into sci-fi um, when I was pretty young. At first, I read a lot of like sci-fi and fantasy when I was like, 7, 8, 9, and then I somehow got like turned off to fantasy. It just like kind of gave me the ick, and I've been like mostly into sci-fi since then. And I don't think I ever heard the term speculative fiction until I was, maybe in high school, and it struck me at that time as a way to like soften science fiction as a way to like make it more palatable to a broader audience. And so I sort of resented that. It's interesting because I've like now as an adult, I've read a few like intros to books by, I think Heinlein had one, like Harlan Ellison wrote this intro about how the yeah, and they're saying how much they prefer the term speculative fiction because they think they associate science fiction with like the pulpy sci-fi of the 30s that's all about like gizmos and I don't know. And so it's like they were trying to give their genre more dignity by calling it speculative fiction, and saying that like what they're writing is not just about, a ray gun or a spaceship. It's about like engaging seriously with the implications of technology and science. And it so that's what they were calling speculative fiction. And I think that is, I don't know, it's maybe like the opposite from what you're talking about. Like you're saying that you consider sci-fi to be like, interest and engagement in that's like rooted in science, as opposed to something that just includes some of the tropes.
But as for speculative fiction, I was trying to make the case to Gordon that speculative fiction is actually just kind of circularly defined, where there is like a speculative fiction community, which if you have heard the term speculative fiction, you know what this is. There's a community of people that they like have the Hugo Awards, they have the Nebula Awards, and they read these certain books, and they read these certain magazines. And speculative fiction is just like the genres these people read in community with the rest of these people. Um, which feels a bit like a ridiculous definition, but I feel like this is actually kind of how it's used in practice. And I think that the purpose of using this term in the modern day, although I agree that like in the past it was a bit different, like I do think that the purpose is to kind of like present or to present like kinship with this community. Like use the term speculative fiction because you like the speculative fiction community and you want to identify yourself as a part of it. Um, and I think that an implication of this is that speculative fiction is kind of like normative. Like I think I actually like that you brought up Sword and Sandals because I actually think Sword and Sandals used to be speculative fiction under this definition, but like now is kind of like not as much because before it used to be like consumed as part of this community, right? But I feel like in the modern day, Sword and Sandals is not really like that popular anymore, and so I think it's still like sort of speculative fiction, but it's like not as speculative fiction as it was in the past under this definition. But at the
Okay.
same time, I feel like the actual academic definition is kind of more like what you're saying. Like it's exploring the implications of some kind of like technology. But I would also say that it kind of goes broader than the implications of just like scientific technology. Like it could also be the implications of like structuring some society in like some alternate way or something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
just sort of any like what if, like not
right.
realism, right?
But I think you're also right in that it has at times been co-opted by literary writers. Like I think Margaret Atwood's the most notorious example where the person's just like, "Oh, well, I don't write science fiction. I write speculative fiction." It's like science fiction is like the lame science that's boring and not good literature, whereas I write like the good literature that still has robots but is not science fiction. And this might be like an equally common usage. I'm not exactly sure. But I don't really have much experience people using the term speculative in like more literary circles.
Yeah, I guess I do have the impression that that's being used in like marketing copy for a wave of uh, newer like literary fiction releases that have come across my corner of the internet. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it sounds like there's still room to, I don't know, reclaim the term or
Yeah, I mean, clearly if no two of us agree, then it's not very well defined, like in general. But yeah, I mean, this is something that like I feel like speculative fiction as a label, like when I first came across it, which was not like super long ago, I was like, oh, this is like a great term that everyone understands, and now I'm just kind of like, hmm. So I'm definitely trying to use the term science fiction more when like that is actually specifically what I'm talking about. Um, I
Mm,
wanted
I
to
guess
talk.
I would
Oh,
say,
go ahead.
oh,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry. Go
just
ahead.
like even though people aren't super familiar with the term, I do feel like they're engaging with it more than ever. Like, Marvel movies would fall under the speculative umbrella, I guess, and at least in my definition. I don't know if um,
Yeah, yeah,
you
for sure.
disagree, but yeah. So it's something it's become like mainstream, but I guess there isn't a consensus on what to call it. Or yeah, I guess I do wonder if like normies who you know like Avengers would recognize that they're engaging in uh, fiction that is like I don't know, in the same realm as Three Body Problem. I don't know if that's something that's like legible to them.
I do think Dune was kind of like a big event in that like I do see Dune as like really kind of like the ultimate sci-fi book, like there's nothing like half sci-fi about it. And like it has been interesting. Like Dune went from this book that I could maybe expect some of my more nerdy friends to know about to like I'll just be like I was on the train recently and there's this person just reading like Heretics of Dune. Like not even like one of the first two books. I was like, "Oh gosh, like I think this is just normal now. You just walk around and there's people that have just like read a lot of Dune, and I do wonder if this will end up actually funneling a lot more like normies, like you say, like into like the true speculative fiction canon.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like if you haven't if you haven't read the book, the movies don't make sense, right? So like if you watch the movie, you're like, this is kind of cool, but like literally what's happening, you have to read the book.
Yeah, that's sort of true. But it has the good vibes. It's the cool vibes. Um
Yeah.
y- Yeah, yeah. I wonder if
The
that
movie
was sort of
actually,
the
my
intention.
my mom read Dune when the first movie came out, or the first Villeneuve movie came out, and she's like not at all a sci-fi person. My dad is super into sci-fi, and I think had been sort of passively trying to get her to read some for years, and she, for decades she didn't. But then the movie came out, and she did.
Yeah, I watched Dune with like a bunch of friends who had not read the book, and like afterwards they were like, ah, like what was the deal with that dude, or like why'd they do all that? And I was like, just like asking me a bunch of questions, had to kind of like go down the like explanation of things. It did feel like pretty left kind of just like unclear if you haven't read the book. But then like a few of those people ended up reading the book afterwards. So yeah, I think it definitely had that effect.
I guess I don't know why I haven't thought about this before, but it's worth mentioning. Like Villeneuve really has been this ambassador for sci-fi for a bit, right? Because his biggest movies have been like Blade Runner 2049, right, a Philip K. Dick adaptation, and then Arrival,
Right.
like a Ted Chiang adaptation, and then finally Dune. Like, and it's pretty interesting, Like, I mean, I'm wondering if like I mean, probably a bit of both, but I'm wondering if he just like thinks that his style is really good for adapting those kinds of stories, or if he's like, a really big fan of like sci-fi with an agenda. Like, I'm gonna bring these stories to the masses.
I don't know. I guess so. I loved Arrival. I was kind of lukewarm on Blade Runner 2049, where it was like, okay, it looks amazing. This is like a great movie to watch in IMAX. Um, but it just, I don't know, it just felt kind of like empty and soulless, like compared to either, well, obviously compared to the book or the original Blade Runner, where it felt so like, I don't know, slick.
Mhm, mhm.
It,
Yeah,
I think
I
that's a
mean
pretty polarizing. Oh, go ahead, Gordon.
or I would kind of agree with that. I mean, it is like a bit strange in the fact that like the thing I remember the most about that movie is the colors being really good. I don't think I've ever had that thought about like a movie before. Like this is my takeaway. Oh, the colors were so good. Um, so that I feel like that kind of speaks to the like the how it looks being more than like the plot and stuff.
Yeah, I remember there was this one time where I was talking to my sister about, so my sister is studying cinematography, and I was trying to compile a list of like movies that I sort of remembered as having the best cinematography, and I was making it, and I was like, you know, I guess I'm surprised to say this, but I feel like the highest one might be Blade Runner 2049, which I like hadn't thought about in a while, but I was like, wow, that movie just looked so good. Like I was just thinking about it, I'm like, wow, like I can't think of a single movie that I thought looked cooler than Blade Runner 2049, but like I just haven't thought about this movie for like a year. But yeah, I couldn't tell you. I don't remember what the plot was. Like
is Ryan Gosling like tracks down old Harrison Ford? I don't know. I don't remember.
It wasn't
uh,
Ryan Gosling like playing Ryan Gosling, right? Like he has a certain type of character, and like he was
Look, he
him in
looked
that
like
movie.
amazing in that raincoat.
Yeah.
on the orange, the orange.
See? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The snow.
And the pink.
Las
um,
Vegas. Yeah.
um, but yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about. We both recently read Ubik by Philip K. Dick,
For the
and
first time?
yeah,
Yes.
like
Oh,
Gordon
wow.
and I. And also, we know that you recently published an article like talking about like how Philip K. Dick is kind of like Saul Bellow, which we thought was like a pretty funny article. We were wondering that if you could talk a little bit about um, like why you like Philip K. Dick so much, and then also like why he is in some ways similar to Saul Bellow.
Yeah, so Philip K. Dick is like probably my all-time favorite sci-fi author, and depending on my mood, my favorite author in any genre. Um, yeah, I guess I first read him when I was like 14. I picked up um, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and I can't remember like no one like gave it to me or recommended it. I think it was maybe someone wanted, like one of my friends wanted to watch Blade Runner, and then I was in a time in my life where I would like never watch the movie before I read the book. Um, so I read the book, and then I was actually quite disappointed by the movie after reading the book. Um, although I've come to love the movie in its own way, but you know, as an adaptation, it's a failure, I think. um, and yeah, so that ignited like an obsession, and I think I've read, I tallied it up recently. I think I've read like 16 or 17 books by him, which is more than almost any other author. I think I've read more Stephen King books, but yeah, I think that the way that he plays with like um, epistemic certainty is really interesting, and like just I think as a teenager coming to his work, um, this this idea that like the world is not what it seems, and um, that you can't trust anything, not even your own senses. I don't know, that was just like something about that really uh, just like got its hooks in me, and the way that he writes about these like really, far out, like fucked up situations, but does it with like a great deal of empathy and heart for his characters, who are, they're all like, um, they all feel very real. Like they all have jobs that they do, and they all have like nagging wives. And yeah, I think that feels different than a lot of the sci-fi that I'd read up until that point, where it was more like, oh, a starship captain is going on an adventure, or whatever, and it wasn't about a fully realized person. Yeah, I think that has made Philip K. Dick very special to me. I think also the way that he writes about like drug subcultures is very compelling. He just has like a very, all of his worlds feel like very lived in, and like if you've read A Scanner Darkly, which is one of my favorites by him, it's this, like all of those little relationships in those books between like these tweaked out hippies and the cops and all that in this uh, dark future that he's imagining. It all just like it feels so convincing and literary in a way that I think he was self-consciously creating, and not in a, but in a way that it feels so much at odds with like the literary speculative fiction that we're kind of ragging on now, where it's not, nothing is like grafted onto his stories. It's just he creates these books that are very beautiful and intense, and the language, like his attention to language, I think is so deliberate. Not in all of his books. There are some that are just, it's like, okay, this, he was just tweaking on speed in 1962 and he like tossed this one off. But I'd say his finest works are real, like there are phrases that will just like stop me cold and be like, oh man, this is amazing. This like says something about the human experience, even though he's talking about like a guy on a planet, like, you know, diving down into some weird Leviathan's lair or whatever. Um, and so the way that I think yeah, just the way that he creates this balance is what makes him my favorite.
Yeah, I think like I sort of think of like even though they're not really similar, I think of Ray Bradbury and like Philip K. Dick as kind of similar in that like I feel like both of them, if you kind of analyze their works at like a very low level of resolution, you're just like, okay, these books have like a lot of sci-fi tropes. You know, they're like very sci-fi. But then I think if you go a layer down, like from like, you know, like a like a language perspective, like they're kind of doing a whole lot more, I think, than like the other books that were like coming out around that time. And I think this kind of puts them in like an interesting position. I think you alluded to this in the post, but I think if someone like Philip K. Dick were to write now, they would just be able to just be like a literary author, you know, but just they were sort of in some ways trapped by like the ecosystem like surrounding them. Even though that like it was what they were writing, right? And so I think like I guess I've always kind of been surprised by Philip K. Dick like not being more widely read. I feel like I didn't meet a ton of people who, when I was younger, who were like into Philip K. Dick. Um, but I am kind of happy to see that Philip K. Dick really seems to be getting like a new life in China. Like I think in China, Philip K. Dick is like a really, really popular author now as far as like Western authors go. It's like, ah, yeah, PKD. Like I have talked to like several Chinese people who are like big Philip K. Dick fans.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that. So
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
how does that, I guess, one, how does that happen? And like two, what are they doing with it? Are they like making adapting his books into like movies or TV over there, or like what's going on?
Oh, well, I think it's just that like you know, China just hasn't really had engagement with Western sci-fi in the past, and so people are just trying to figure out what their canon is, and like in some ways they're able to engage with it in like a more unbiased way, right? Like there isn't like the historical weight of like how good people think this author is or whatever. That people are just kind of like, oh, these are like the authors that are popular in America and Great Britain. Like let's check them out. And because a lot of these people are brought into the pretty much everyone's brought into the genre by Remembrance of Earth's Past, like that evokes certain sci-fi, and so like as a result, I would say that like Arthur C. Clarke and Asimov are kind of the foundation of sci-fi fandom in China, as opposed to like more like new wave people. But also like Philip K. Dick, it's just people have discovered him and really latched on. Um, so yeah, I think it's just more like it's kind of an interesting simulation of like what would happen if people just kind of did like on some level like an unbiased appraisal of like the speculative fiction canon and then like came away with their own conclusions.
Hmm.
Uh,
That's interesting. I guess thinking about like what the vibe of Remembrance of Earth's Past is, I feel like a lot of it feels like Rendezvous with Rama, but
mhm.
then thinking about like, sorry for the spoilers, but like the very end of Death's End when um I don't know, should I can I
You can, yeah, you can spoil it.
okay. Um when the there's like that missed love interest. I forget all of their names now, but like where they've been waiting like millennia to meet up again, and then because of like one of them gets caught in like a time dilation trap, they miss each other by like hundreds of thousands of years or something, and then they leave a note like carved into the crust of the planet saying like we lived a good life. And then okay, that makes me cry
Yeah,
every time.
I
I,
cried at that scene for sure. Yeah.
and it like I was like, hey, that doesn't feel like Arthur C. Clarke. That feels like Philip K. Dick. That feels like, getting the unexpected like gut punch. And it's like, why am I crying? So I don't know if that was if like, Liu was explicitly influenced by PKD, but I guess I could see that if he was.
That scene was so good. I love it.
Yeah.
She like comes to the surface and is like, "Oh, they're gonna have written it in the stone, like would know to like write in the stone," and they're just like looking down, and it's like it's nowhere to be found. Just like keep going deeper. And then,
Yeah,
very well
that was such a crazy book to read. I remember like with Death's End in particular, I was like listening to it on audiobook while I was like on some pretty extended like car ride with my family, and then like at one point my dad or my mom or something just like, so like what's happening in, or like, what are you listening to, like what's happening in your book? And I'm like, so the solar system, it's like turning into a pancake, but like hold on. I swear it makes sense.
I do,
uh,
yeah, it is like the craziest way to end a trilogy because it feels like so measured and like well plotted for the first two books. And then you know at the end of Dark Forest you get like the payoff of like the twist of like the Dark Forest theory. And then he gets to Death's End. I felt like he almost panicked. He was like, I gotta finish this up. So let me just throw every good idea I've ever had into this, and it'll just be like totally insane.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember I finished Dark Forest. I was like, I really liked the book, and it was like it was a very self-contained book, sort of like it had like a clear vision and plot arc. And then I'm like, start reading Death's End, and it's also like, in Constantinople, we have like this woman with like dimensional abilities. I'm like,
Yeah.
like we have the second like assaulting the walls. I'm like, what is happening? Am I reading the right book currently?
Yeah, also like I remember I saw some critical review of Remembrance of Earth's Past where someone was just like, yeah, there's a lot of ideas, but it's not, there's kind of like other books that are like this, sort of like in terms of like idea density. I was kind of like, which books? Like tell me what books these are. Like they were just kind of like gesturing at like books that were similarly ambitious and just like cramming like every idea that they had. But I guess I came away skeptical that like this would have been done in like the same way in like some other book. It's definitely going beyond Arthur C. Clarke, like you were saying. So I don't know. Like, do you feel like this book is kind of like not that much of an anomaly in terms of like really maximalist, like crazy conclusions, or do you think it does kind of stand apart?
I mean, from of the books I've read, it's definitely it's one of the top books of idea density. I guess it might be comparable to like A Fire Upon the Deep.
Okay,
Um,
I am planning to read that pretty soon,
okay, yeah,
but I have
you're
not
in
read
for
it
a
yet.
treat.
Okay.
Gordon, have you read it?
I have not either, yeah, but
Okay.
I'm supposed to be good
Yeah,
on that.
it's got like I don't know, it's not I don't know. You'll see. You'll see.
But yeah, I am excited to read this book. Um, but
But yeah,
but
I
anyway,
can't think
oh,
of like many comparable books to to like Death's End. Um yeah, because Death's End is like, mind blow emoji like every 20 pages. Um
mhm.
it was almost too much. It was like I can't handle this anymore. But
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely
it
my
did feel like
preferred.
the book like ended, and then there was just like more, and then there was like more.
Yeah, that is true. Like
Yeah.
I did think the book was over like a couple times. Um, like I especially thought the book was over when they saw that message, and then they're just like,
Um,
"But what if the universe was like leaking other universes?" I'm just like, "Oh man."
yeah, the universe ends before the book does.
yeah, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Um, but okay, so we've gotten a little bit far away from what I did want to ask you about though, which is like I did want to ask you to lay out your case for how Philip K. Dick is similar to Saul Bellow.
Oh, right, sorry, yeah. Uh, okay, so this is not a serious argument
Yeah.
that I was
Yeah.
making. Mostly it really the argument hinges on the fact that they were both married 5 times, and they're both often accused of being misogynist. And so my argument, so in addition to just the making like the literary quality case for Philip K. Dick, which I think is often overlooked, um, uh, I think that Saul Bellow and Philip K. Dick were not misogynists. I think they loved women too much. I think that you can see this in their work. The women are not flat and like undeveloped. I think I feel like I have read criticisms of Philip K. Dick where they're like, oh, it's just, it's just the hysterical woman characters in every book, but I think there's more like almost a fear of the power of women that you see in his books, where it's not just that they're cardboard cutouts who don't add anything to the protagonist's life. It's that they have the power to like destroy this poor schmuck's life. And that's the same thing that I think you see in Saul Bellow's women, where they are, it's not necessarily a flattering portrait that he paints of, but he'll paint them with such tenderness and like attention to detail that it's like a character is in Humboldt's Gift is reflecting on his ex-wife who he's seen in divorce court, and the way that he describes how her hair is piled up on her head, making her seem top heavy, and like how beautiful her her jawline is. And it's like this comes from a place of like an excess of feeling. And I think that further evidence of this is the fact that they both married 5 women. And I think that if you are just, you're just like playboy, sexist asshole, you'll have, you'll have 5 affairs or something, but you don't divorce your wife and then you go out and you say, I love this next woman so much, I'm gonna commit my life to her, and like this time it's real. And then do that, like 4 more times. I think that there's something in them that is clearly broken when it comes to their relationships with women, but it's not a lack of regard for women. So yeah, I don't like it when they when people dismiss them as just sort of like run-of-the-mill misogynists. I have a special place in my heart for their kind of dysfunction, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, having just read Ubik, I was kind of like so this character Pat, who's one of the main character, gets introduced, and when she like first gets introduced, it's like a bit icky because it's just like mainly just like the main character is describing how she's really hot and stuff. But then like she ends up being like through the course of the book like easily like the most kind of terrifying character, and like reading the book, you're like always kind of like wondering what she's up to and stuff throughout the book. And I feel like when someone is sort of like writes misogynistically, like the main thing they do is like kind of like have women like not really have agency through their books. Like they're kind of like there to be like, seen more than like actually do things. And I definitely didn't feel that reading this book.
I've been kind of thinking about how like men writing women derogatory is actually kind of used to describe like a few different things that are just not really the same. I feel like there's what Gordon was describing, which is kind of like they're mainly just having women to like, titillate and just be like objects. Then there's also the way of writing women. I think like sometimes like Neil Stevenson is criticized for this, where the women are kind of just written as though they're like men. um, and then there's like what you were talking about, where maybe in some ways the way that they're written is kind of like reinforcing like traditional gender roles, but like even so, they're still portrayed as these kind of like full characters. And I feel like these 3 things are just like actually like very, very different. And I think it can be hard to predict like which of them you're getting when you're just kind of aware that this book is like some book is like problematic in some way. I remember when I read like Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe, like the very first thing that people were saying about this book online was like, well, you know, like this book is like pretty like chauvinistic and this and that. And like, I mean, yeah, women are not treated well in this novel. And it is also definitely reinforcing traditional gender roles. But like at the same time, I thought the women in this story were like really, really well written, like really, really memorable, and like had agency and were like doing really interesting things. And this is something I was kind of surprised by because I actually was kind of going in expecting it to be more like what Gordon was talking about. Like you have just women that only exist to be sex objects. But like as soon as I started, I was like, oh, this is like not going to be that kind of book. And I guess I was pleasantly surprised by this.
Yeah, I haven't read Gene Wolfe, but he's been recommended to me a few times now, so I feel like I have to read him at some point. Um, but yeah, I was struck by the same thing reading or rereading The Moon is a Harsh Mistress recently,
Mhm.
where I feel like Heinlein in particular is often criticized for not writing women well, or just like in general being like too horny in his writing. And it's yeah, in Moon is a Harsh Mistress, like it's definitely a very horny book, but um, the women are like some of the leaders of the revolution, and they are uh, they're sexy, but they're also like important and intellectual figures in the book. So I do think it gets in like the search for villains. I think a lot of um, a lot of this writing by men gets flattened into and like there is plenty of terrible writing of women by men, but I think it's in reality it can be a lot more nuanced and complicated and like um yeah, like there are some very icky parts of Heinlein where it seems like he has this weird obsession with incest. I don't know if you noticed this, like in every book he's like exploring the like conceptual like moral limits of incest, and it's like that was not necessary for this particular book, but whatever.
Okay, so like we don't have like a ton of time left, so I did want to talk about as like a final real topic. I wanted to talk a little bit about like Futurist letters, um, and then maybe there will be some bonus topic that I thought would be funny, but we'll see if we have time for that. So Futurist letters is like I would say like sort of small Substack outlet. Like it's definitely growing, but it's like pretty new. And they have like I don't know, like in my opinion, they have a pretty interesting cultural project, and you're like one of their main contributors. So I was wondering like if you could talk about how you initially got involved with the project and like what you think about it and what it's been like working with them.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't say I'm a main contributor. I've had two pieces in Futurist Letters recently, but I was like when I first got on Substack, maybe like a year and a half ago. I think at some point I just was served up one of the stories that they published in my feed, and found it really interesting. It was and I'm blanking on both the title and the author now, but it was a story about like an imagined like dying process, like an assisted suicide process that was just like really well done, funny and poignant, and so I think that's what made me subscribe initially. And then a few months ago, so I was just sort of like admired from afar. And then a few months ago, uh, Cairo Smith, the editor of Futurist Letters, reached out to me and asked if I would um, write a book review of Worst Boyfriend Ever, the uh, so-called novel of an anonymous degenerate sex blogger who is well known on Substack. I was a little hesitant to say yes because I figured if I did that, then it would bring the trolls, and I wasn't sure if I wanted all that. Um, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to have to read his book too. But eventually I said yes, and then I reviewed the book for Futurist Letters, and then a few weeks after that, I sent in a short story, and because I was like, you know what, I'm happy to be associated with Futurist Letters. I like them a lot, but I'd rather have it like, you know, be my own writing instead of writing about this guy who is kind of the worst um, in a lot of ways. So yeah, so I've now I had a piece of short fiction about a I guess sentient park bench, um, and
Yeah, it was a cool story.
Yeah,
Um,
we've read the story.
yeah, I thought it had like I thought it was really cool to have the depiction of kind of like this protest turned riot, like from the perspective of, you know, this like park bench. It was quite entertaining.
yeah, I guess that was so I wrote it not long after the January 6th insurrection, and I think I was like searching for a way to like process the experience of seeing that on, you know, live TV, and that sort of was well that was like one train of thought that was going on where it was like, wow, like, you know, how do you capture that? And then separately I had been thinking about like consciousness and the ways that uh, AI might emerge not from like some concerted human effort to create AGI, but through like an accidental, like passing a threshold of complexity through all of these like internet connected devices. And so that turned into a series of park benches who are like equipped as Wi-Fi hotspots and like with some basic like smart functions, and that gives rise to a form of consciousness, and then they become the sort of witnesses to this riot that emerges as a result of a sort of a corporate project, planetary colonization project that's like kind of off stage. Um, so yeah, it's part of or it turned into so I wrote a series of stories that were all sort of centered around this one company called Red Planet, and uh, that became the germ of a novel that I'm working on currently. So it's been something I've been like just been kicking around my brain for the last 5 years, I guess.
In I think in like, I mean, in some ways, like I feel like how the how the observation happens is like sort of similar to like 17776. Have you heard of this book before?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Okay. Yeah, this is like my favorite speculative story in general. But I feel like you have a similar thing where, as a result of the narrators just being like not really like, well, spoilers, but not being like of humanity, like they're kind of able to make observations from like an interesting vantage point. Okay, well, anyway, I think this is a pretty good time to wrap things up. So I guess as a final thing that we ask our guests on the show, do you have a speculative short story that you would like to recommend?
Yes. Okay. So I guess my one of my favorite short stories of all time that I don't think I ever really run into people who have read it before. It's called Hinterlands by William Gibson. It's in the collection Burning Chrome. And it's this like very sort of melancholic story about people who are rejected from a program and then assist in this program of discovery. I guess I don't want to give away too much because it's the experience of reading it is, I think, important. But yeah, have you guys
I've
read it?
not.
I haven't read it yet.
Oh,
No.
well, yeah, I guess I'm about to. Is there anything else you would like to plug?
I guess just my Substack. Yeah, I've published a couple of short fiction on my Substack that are speculative. uh, so yeah,
All right.
check these out.
Yeah, so you can find Lillian at lillianreviewofbooks.substack.com. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and we will see you all next week.
Welcome back. So, any thoughts on the episode, Kevin?
All right, so we recorded this episode quite a long time ago, and a lot of things have happened since then, including us going to Worldcon, Gordon getting sick, us editing magazine submissions, and a whole lot of other things. So I can't say I remember a whole ton of what we talked about in specific, but we definitely covered some topics that I was interested in, especially relating to genre and some of the books that we had been reading recently. There were actually a lot more things that I wanted to ask about Ubik by Philip K. Dick in particular, and also The Lathe of Heaven. So I was wondering, Gordon, if you wanted to start out by talking a little bit about that, and also if you want to share any thoughts about the episode that you had.
Yeah. So, first of all, yeah, it's been what, like 2.5 weeks. It's been
It's
quite a second.
Isn't it been more than that?
Uh,
2.5. Well, maybe that's
yeah,
right.
but regardless, yeah, it was really fun to talk to Lillian. It was a good conversation. Don't remember a ton in detail, but yeah, in terms of Ubik and the Lathe of Heaven, I feel like these were actually two very similar books. And I read them. They were like also both books I had like pretty near the top of my to read list for like 5 years or something, but then like never read for some reason. And I like them both a lot. And I think they were quite similar thematically in terms of main theme being around what makes reality real, kind of, and how real is, like, if you're kind of like experiencing a world and it changes in some ways, or like you lose all your memories or stuff, or you have people existing in a world that's like been created by some other agent, are they, still real people? And things like that. So I feel like it was dealing with a lot of the same themes. And in particular, reading Ubik, I remember I was reading the beginning portion of this book, and I thought it was like okay, but I was kind of like, but there's kind of just like a lot of like missing threads, and I was like, I feel like it was a bit all over the place, and I was like, man, I want to like love this book because it has so many cool ideas, but I feel like it's not quite complete. But yeah, I was just tweaking. Like the book was fantastic. Like everything I thought was just like misremembered, kind of like came together and made sense. Like more than I thought it was possible to do, sort of. So yeah, would definitely recommend.
I think with both of these books, I wish that I had had a little bit more time to spend on them. I did kind of cram through them because I wanted to have them read before we recorded this episode. With Ubik in particular, I was like really sleep deprived when I read this book. And this is not a good book to read when you're sleep deprived. And like, also, I feel like the beginning is kind of, I don't know, maybe not the most gripping part of the book. There is just kind of like all this corporate America
Agreed,
stuff that I was
agreed,
like
yeah.
not into at all. And then like there's this scene that's sort of like a little bit like, you know, it's kind of like pedophilia. And I was like a little bit uncomfortable. Wait, she was like under 18, right? Like she's like a minor.
She may have been 17. Yes, I think she was.
Yeah. So I was just
Yeah, I'm not sure,
yeah.
but
I'm pretty sure she was
regardless,
like
so
I'm
I
pretty
think she
sure
was
she was a
17. Yeah,
minor.
yeah.
And so I was like, okay, sure. And I was like, I hope this book gets better. But then it definitely got better. Like there was a time halfway through this book where I was like, whoa, this is like really starting to cook. And I ended up, I think, liking this book a fair bit more than The Lathe of Heaven. Uh, the thing that one thing that's a little bit frustrating to me is that while I think that Ursula K. Le Guin is a great prose stylist, I don't actually love her prose that much. It's not really my preference. And I think that my favorite thing about it is that it's sort of able to create this like timeless mythic register that is cool. But this is the first book that I read by Ursula K. Le Guin that was really just super centered in like a specific point in time. Like there's the beginning place, right? But even the beginning place is a little bit like Campbellian and mythic, you know?
Yeah. Well,
And
like
so,
super in
yeah,
that way.
yeah. Okay, super that way. But like this book was just kind of more like smack dab in the middle of mundane reality. And it's like kind of wasn't that into it. Like I just kind of didn't really enjoy the reading experience for a lot of the time. But the ideas were pretty cool again. But I actually did I did like Philip K. Dick as like a prose stylist a fair bit. I mean, I think it's sort of known that he was kind of like ghettoized by being in genre fiction. Like I think that there are a lot of people who are like, yeah, this dude was actually just like a great writer in his own right, in a way that like a lot of his genre contemporaries were not. And I also feel like it's like a known thing that he was like a bit insane, and maybe more than a bit insane. And I think it does come through in this text, but in like a good way, like an interesting way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did prefer Ubik as well, although I liked the Life of Heaven like quite a bit more than you did. But yeah, Ubik was like much more quotable. Just to sort of like read a quote here, is fairly soon I'll be reborn into another womb, I think. At least Glenn thinks so. I keep dreaming about a smoky red light, and that's bad. That's not a morally proper womb to be reborn into. I really like this quote. And I mean, okay, that was like more a comedic quote, but there are also a lot of quotes that were just these really interesting kind of just long rambles, like connecting a ton of different like random threads from various like philosophies and myths and whatnot. That yeah, I don't know. I feel like he was quite ambitious with his inner monologues of his characters.
you know it kind of reminded like one vibe that I really liked in this book was the part where kind of just like driving to find some Ubik in the world, this like dream world that's like disintegrating and like doesn't really feel especially rendered. uh this kind of reminded me of, do you know, so Gordon and I went to the same high school. Do you remember that like driver's ed simulator that you would
Yes,
do where like you would
yes.
just kind of like drive, you could like drive
And
off
you
the
could like
road.
you could like dip off the instruction and just
Yeah.
like go into the distance and just keep driving.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
yeah. We did this
that
too.
was kind of like my mental image for this part of the book. And this is definitely like a very specific sort of vibe that I've not encountered in a book before.
Yeah, so something else we talked about in the episode a bit was and this was like like I think it was a, like a bit confused conversation during the episode, but on the topic of genre and specifically kind of what the term speculative fiction means, sort of, and what is meant by it. So yeah, maybe just like rehash a bit like what your opinion of
Oh
what
yeah,
people mean when they say speculative
yeah, my
fiction.
my take, yes. So I believe that speculative fiction is somewhat circularly defined, which is not a bad thing. But I think when people say speculative fiction as opposed to science fiction or fantasy, their main goal is they want to align themselves with the people who read speculative fiction, which is this known group that can be associated with events like Worldcon, the Hugo Awards, certain sections of the bookstore. And I feel like when you say that you read speculative fiction, you're mostly just wanting to signal that you are one of these people. And as a result, speculative fiction is just whatever speculative fiction fans read. So you identify the speculative fiction fans, which you can do based on like the attendance / branding of certain events and looking at the attendees. And then you can kind of derive what speculative fiction is from that. And I would say that a consequence of this is that what is speculative fiction changes over time based on the preferences of this group of people. So I would say that a book like The Ministry of Time would not really have been speculative fiction in the past, because I don't really feel like the people who read speculative fiction, which is a much smaller group, would have engaged with it in the same way. Like perhaps they would have read it, but not really as genre fiction. But I must concede that under this definition, The Ministry of Time is definitely speculative fiction now, because the people who read speculative fiction are engaging with it as though it is genre fiction in large numbers. And this just makes it speculative fiction. And I don't want to sound like I'm trivializing speculative fiction or anything. Like, I think it is actually useful to signal kinship with these people. But I think if you really get down to it, that is the main reason why people say that they read speculative fiction, because it doesn't really have the same kind of unifying brand that something like fantasy or science fiction does. And if you wanted to talk about conventions like that, you would probably use one of those more specific terms.
Yeah. And I mean, I think whenever someone talks about the tropes of the genre or something, they're going to clarify like more granularly. I feel like you'll never hear like someone talk about speculative fiction tropes like in reference to like a certain book or something. They'll just talk about like science fiction tropes or fantasy tropes. And I do kind of think this is just because like, yeah, these things like actually have tropes. Speculative fiction doesn't really have tropes outside of like, okay, well, there's science fiction tropes and there's fantasy tropes and there's horror tropes, and speculative fiction's like a big umbrella that includes all of them, so they're all speculative fiction tropes. But like it doesn't like really have necessarily like a thing that outside of like maybe that it's like speculating on something, but I feel like that's just very vague.
Yeah, but like I also feel that not everything in this genre umbrella is speculative fiction, for the reason that speculative fiction fans don't engage with it.
Agree.
Genre. Yeah. Like I think there are plenty of horror books that speculative fiction fans just like don't really read. I would say a book like Doctor Sleep by Stephen King is pretty close to speculative fiction, but I probably wouldn't classify it as such, because I feel like speculative fans aren't engaging with it as that kind of genre fiction. And they may read it and they may be more likely to be interested in it, but they're not like consuming it in that way. And yeah, I think when you say speculative fiction, you want to be like, oh, well, you know, I read either science fiction or fantasy or both, but also I'm like chill with the people who read the stuff that I don't read as well. I mean, I also think that there are certain things that are becoming less speculative fiction. Like, I think military science fiction, for example, is becoming less and less speculative fiction over time as the core group of speculative fiction fans moves further away from it. I think it's definitely still speculative fiction, but I think like previously I would have considered it to be one of like the core subgenres, you know, like in the 1970s, 1980s. Whereas now I feel like it's more on the periphery, kind of like similar to horror.
Yeah.
Maybe like a little bit more than horror, just because of the history.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely makes sense.
I also think that this is, maybe this wasn't always the case. Like I think people like Joseph Campbell and Isaac Asimov maybe had more like rigid ideas of what speculative fiction is and like a more precise classification. But I think that in society generally, you're seeing this move towards defining media in terms of audience. There has been this move in music generally where now that Spotify has such granular data about who listens to what, you can more granularly classify music in terms of who listens to it, as opposed to any sonic characteristics. And I feel like this is actually just the classification that is more useful to people. People want to know what kind of music you listen to because they want to know if you're a person like that. And to be a person like them suggests that you listen to the music that, you know, that person would listen to, or that like you would listen to. And so I think that you have this movement everywhere to where genres are just being defined in terms of who consumes them. And I think this is a big change from before, where because you didn't have access to that information, it was more about like, what are the specific qualities of something like in the process of creation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also not even in music, for example. Like I don't know, I feel like punk, for example, as a genre is like just as much defined by like the people who consumed punk, like maybe even more so than like its actual musical characteristics as a genre. I don't think this is necessarily like a only now possible thing in terms of being an algorithm, although it is now possible for it to be like, you know, a less like cohesive scene or something. But just like having some subgenre of art just like being defined by like a scene rather than like characteristics of the art, I don't think is really a new thing at all necessarily. And yeah, I think just like speculative fiction is kind of one of these cases. All right, so this past week, Kevin and I went to Worldcon, which is the main speculative fiction convention where the Hugo Awards are hosted. And yeah, Kevin, what were your thoughts on Worldcon?
So Worldcon, I would say, was pretty similar to what I expected. I think it was as advertised. I think one of the main things that is supposed to be unique about Worldcon compared to other conventions is that it's very flat. Like you just have people who are famous figures in speculative fiction milling around just as they would be if they were a fan, and you can kind of just like have a conversation with these people on equal footing. And this is pretty cool. And sometimes this has lead to a sort of awkward situation where I would be in like a group and there would just be some really famous author that I knew of, but I hadn't actually read any of their books. I just knew like about how famous they were, and I just had nothing to say to them. Like there were a couple times where I just like end up in a like group conversation with David Brin, and I was like, "Whoa, it's David Brin. He's like famous." But at the same time, like I don't know anything about his books. Like, am I just gonna be like, "Oh, I really would like to read Startide Rising at some point in the future"? It's like, no, I was kind of just like, hmm. Um, I will say that it was maybe a little bit more insular than I was expecting by design, in that there weren't really a ton of events that were geared towards like meeting people compared to what I was expecting. I feel like at like even I think compared to Worldcon, the Northwest Sci-Fi convention, there weren't quite as many like mixer type events. It was very much focused on like panels, and also like panel screenings and readings, which was not a bad thing. But I feel like it wasn't really like, yeah, optimized for meeting new people. I didn't meet like a ton of people compared to what I was expecting, I would say. Um, but you know, we met some people, especially at like the pre-event stuff. I guess for me a little more than Gordon because I actually live here and so I could go to some stuff early. But yeah, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely. I agree. Like it being quite flat was like a pretty big takeaway. Like the very first thing we went to, which was like some editors meetup. I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. Like someone pulls up a chair behind me, and it's just like, he's like, it's got a little name tag. It's like, oh, it's like Neil Clark, and I'm like, oh shit, it's Neil Clark of like Clark's World, you know. And he went on to like win the best editor Hugo Award. Like a couple
I mean,
days later, but.
that was that was so funny because there weren't really any other editors in this group anywhere close to his level of stature, right? Like And we had kind of all coalesced before he showed up, so we're just like, sitting there, and then just like Neil Clark shows up, and people are just kind of like not being super overt about it, but are very much in the position of like, Neil Clark, please share with us your knowledge. Like,
yeah. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun as a convention. Kind of like the way it's set up is, yeah, I feel like most of the meeting people stuff is like made to take kind of like, so like after the actual like events of the convention, which are pretty much all just like panels and readings, there's like all these parties that like take place in this hotel like a couple blocks away where like, most of the people from out of town stay. And there's just like a ton of different room parties and stuff. And I would say this is like where most of the meeting people like kind of happened, and like was sort of set up to happen. Um which was, yeah, I mean, I thought it was solid, but like I guess I do kind of agree with you. I think it would be cool if there was like a bit more diversity in terms of like the type of events that like, occurred. Uh but yeah, some of the panels and stuff and readings were pretty cool. I would say like the strongest like opinion I came away from Worldcon with was that I just like really needed to read some like Ada Palmer because she was just like actually cooking.
yeah.
Because like, yeah, we saw her give like a reading and then also at like a panel as well on libraries. That was, yeah, quite interesting. So yeah, I read like the first Tarek Nota book, and I'm currently reading the second one. It's like, yeah, very very good. So it was good from that sense of just like, getting kind of like a really good fiction recommendation just due to being very impressed by the person.
Yeah, Ada Palmer was someone who came to my attention because one of our listeners actually gave a really strong recommendation of this book to me specifically, Tarek Nota. And this is right before Worldcon. I read a description of the book and I was like, wow, I really need to read this book. I wonder if I should try to read it before I go to Worldcon. But this did not happen. But I was just like, okay, I definitely need to see Ada Palmer at some of these panels because I feel like she's going to be cooking. And she was indeed cooking. She was cooking extremely hard. I mean, like, yeah, that library panel was interesting because I feel like she was very much just on a different wavelength from like the other people at the panel. Like,
Yeah.
there were some situations where they would kind of ask some like question about libraries, and then someone would just like say something about like censorship that wasn't especially like mind blowing. And then Ada Palmer just has like this like long ass anecdote about like having Machiavelli's personal copy of like this one text and like her experience of encountering him and also like this other mysterious reader from like the Enlightenment in the margins and feeling like a sense of kinship across time. And then I would just kind of be like, whoa. And then the next person would just be like, like when I was a kid, I really liked going to this one library. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, it is like a different vibe when you're like, your interaction with libraries is like, like the local school library, the local public library versus like, going to like Florence to like, research the great rare books of like the, medieval period of the Enlightenment and stuff. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to roast these people too hard, but like, because I think this is sort of how the panel was advertised. But like,
Agree, yeah.
yeah, like it was just like I was like, wow, like that sure is a thing I did not know about the Library of Florence. Like, I would say another panel that was kind of like unexpectedly good was the Joanna Russ panel, which friend of the pod Rich Horton was on, as well as Michael Swanwick. And yeah, I don't know. Like so we talked about Joanna Russ a little bit with Rich Horton on the podcast before, and I think this is actually like pretty good context for seeing this panel because he shared some of these ideas, but in like a more formal way. And then we also just got a broader sense of how the genre community interacted with Joanna Russ in general. And yeah, I mean, it definitely made me a lot more interested in her as a person. I mean, the most interesting takeaway that I came away with is that people seem to say that Joanna Russ didn't necessarily want to be this like outspoken feminist advocate. She just sort of felt a responsibility to do it because she didn't think anyone else would. And towards the end of her career, when she sort of felt like her job was done, she kind of just like went to writing more like, tropey golden age science fiction. And I think this is like kind of fun, but like also a bit sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely like this sense of her being some sort of kind of like protector type figure, willing to be kind of like adversarial and potentially sacrifice like her like just like potential success and like how well liked she is in the community and stuff for like it to be just like better for women in general.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like Michael Swanwick and Rich Horton actually both had like really great anecdotes for this panel. Michael Swanwick had this funny anecdote about being able to correspond with Joanna Russ as a young boy that was pretty funny. And then um, also like various moments in her stories that caused a lot of controversy and like the fallout from that. And then Rich Horton had this funny anecdote about reading The Female Man when he was a teenager and like being kind of pissed off, but then growing to appreciate the text as he got older. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I wasn't exactly sure what to expect from this panel, but I didn't expect it to be so like personal. I feel like in most panels that you go to that are sort of honoring some author, it's a little bit more detached slash like canon focused. But yeah, I don't know. I just really like this panel. I thought it was probably my favorite panel of the convention.
Oh yeah, then I guess we can talk about like the Hugo Awards themselves a little bit.
Oh yeah,
Considering we did all our posts for them and stuff.
right.
So yeah, I mean, Tainted Cup won Best Novel, which was my favorite, at least, and Kevin's like second favorite. So that was kind of hype. And then for best short story, it was It's Just Getting Like Family Is by Nevo, which we both thought was quite good, even if it wasn't our favorite. So I don't know, felt sort of.
I mean, I think these were kind of, I don't know, the right choices. I guess I sort of feel like if I like detached myself from my aesthetic preferences somewhat, like I feel like these are kind of correct in some way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then yeah, I would not agree with that statement for best novelette though, which was yeah, Four Sisters Overlooking the Sea, which neither of us particularly liked, but it did win, and yeah, I mean those are the ones that we at least talked about, but yeah, overall, honestly, I feel like the Hugo Awards themselves, like I kind of wish it was like a bit more of a show than it was, I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree. Like, I think one thing that was kind of irritating to me is that they had this whole like trailer for like the movies, which in my opinion are not really that core to what the Hugo Awards are. But then on the slideshow for like the actual works of literature the Hugo Awards are about, they don't hype them up in like any way. Like they don't
don't
even
even
show the
put a
cover of these
quote
books.
or like show a
Yeah,
cover.
like
Yeah,
I don't know. Like I feel like it would have been sort of cool if that like maybe for the best novel, like intermittently through the ceremony, some person just goes on to like read part of the Tainted Cup or like do some kind of like skit or something like that. And I just didn't really get the sense that people were like super plugged into the nominees in general. Like, I mean, I think people had a favorite best novel, but I didn't really hear a ton of discourse about like who was going to win the minor awards and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know if you did.
yeah. I think it was like talked about. I think like actually like I think I actually just like didn't really talk about the Hugo Awards at all at Worldcon. Like, I mean, outside of like I guess like a little bit right afterwards, but even then, not really. And uh, ooh,
I
there
don't
you
know
go.
why I got yoinked.
Rip. Anyway, yeah, I don't really think I talked about the Hugo Awards much at all outside of just the ceremony. And yeah, I got the sense that not a lot of people there like read a lot of stuff, which I mean is admittedly like very fair. Like I don't know.
Yeah, it was a bit of a grind.
Yeah, like I don't. We wouldn't have done it if we weren't like writing reviews of stuff. But like I don't know, you would hope like I don't want to like point fingers at anyone, but like you would hope at least like the people like presenting the awards would have like had read stuff or at least like knew what they were kind of like, which was just like pretty clearly not the case. I feel like, like, and yeah, I don't know. Like I thought it was like a bit disappointing that like it felt like sort of like one of the most entertaining moments of this show was just like, you know, the pre-recorded speech that because like he wasn't even there that Albert Jackson Bennett gave after like winning for the Tandem Cup. Which was like honestly quite good. But
it was so good.
but it was still like, you know, I feel just like a lot of like the presenting and like hyping stuff up and like the slideshow and stuff could have been, yeah, a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, it was weird in that like it was more tied to like the peripheral categories than the main ones. I feel like there actually was like more like awareness of what was going on in like TV shows and like movies and stuff like that. I mean, even like the central bit of the award ceremony, which I didn't realize at the time, was like a reference to like the song from Agatha All Along, the Marvel show, which was which was like one of the nominees. But I don't know about these things, you know. But I got the sense that a good amount of the audience was into it.
Yeah. Which, on the other hand, I'm sure like more people saw Dune than like read anything at these awards, which is like fair, I guess. But on the other hand, like I don't know, no one cares about the Hugo Award for best movie. Like I feel like the Hugo Awards for like best novel are just like used by like a good amount of people, like even outside of like people at this community for just like determining like what the best sci-fi or fantasy book is for like a certain year, and is like used for book recommendations and stuff. Where like, you know, no one's going to like the Hugo Awards to determine like what to watch, right? These just like aren't things that are used. So I feel like that should have been given like more gravitas.
But saying all that, I think in fairness to the organizers, it was a very competently run convention. Like I never really got the sense that stuff was like going wrong or sideways, even if stuff was. And I remember like the one criticism that people had of the opening ceremony, which was that there was like no music, was like pretty quickly remedied for the closing ceremony. And so I appreciated that as well. Like it definitely felt like the people behind the scenes knew what they were doing. So that part of it was definitely good to see because this is definitely not a given. Like this is pretty thankless work at any sort of convention.
True. And I will say I was impressed just in general at like the setup for the convention. Like it felt like the convention center had just like all these kind of like different rooms where like events were set up to take place. And I felt like they in general did a pretty good job at like putting, you know, like assigning big rooms to events that they knew would have like high demand and stuff. So like when there was like, I don't know, the Brandon Sanderson reading or something, it was just like, you know, in this bigger auditorium that's like wasn't the same one they use for like the like Ada Plummer had for like her reading, for example, because Brandon Sanderson is obviously a much bigger name. Yeah, in general, I thought like the space was pretty good. Everything kind of felt organized quite well, especially considering it felt like a lot of people just kind of like or just like heard about an event and then sort of like got themselves on the panel and stuff and we're just like, I want to be part of it. Like talking to people who were like on certain panels and stuff, it felt like a lot of it were people just kind of like volunteering, but it still worked pretty seamlessly. At least everything I was at, I think everyone who was supposed to be there like was there on time, which was yeah, pretty cool. And feels like kind of rare for this sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, and it is unfortunate that like the whole George R. R. Martin thing kind of cast like overshadowed stuff about the convention because like this wasn't really within their control at all, and like there was just like a lot of other stuff that did go well.
Wait, what was
But
the George R. R. Martin thing?
oh, just like the news, like the national news story where like there was that one fan that like asked like George R. R. Martin if was telling George R. R. Martin that he was like probably gonna die soon, and like if you'd be down for like Brandon Sanderson to like write the rest of the books in this eventuality in a way that was like pretty tasteless.
Oh yeah, that's kind of fucked. I didn't actually see that this was a thing.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
made the national like people messaged. There was someone that messaged me about it.
oh huh.
Um,
Yeah. Uh, but yeah, yeah, it was cool getting to see George R. R. Martin, even if I didn't get to talk to him. Uh,
uh-huh.
he was probably. I mean, I think like the Game of Thrones series was like the first kind of clearly adult sci-fi fantasy series I read.
I'm kind of I'm kind of into the idea of reading every George R. R. Martin book that's not A Song of Ice and Fire. Like
Uh-huh.
I heard of another book by him that's like very well liked, but it's kind of overshadowed. I think it's called like Tough Voyaging or something, or like Tough something. It's like
Mhm.
some alternate history set in like the American South.
Hmm.
It's like,
Huh.
ooh.
Um. Yeah. But yeah, fun convention, and it's gonna be in LA next year. Yeah,
LA.
in 2026. So if you are interested, you can go to LA. So like I guess like about a month or 3 weeks ago or so now, yeah,
Hmm.
we started accepting fiction submissions, and I mean we just recently published our first one, Snow Light by Dylan O'Neill, which you can check out. But also, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about what the process has been like, looking at submissions and stuff?
Yeah, so I didn't exactly know what to expect at all from like putting up a submissions posting. Uh, I was kind of expecting us to get like more submissions at the very start. I did kind of like, I guess specifically, I thought we would get a lot of spam. Like, I
Mhm.
thought that we would kind of get spammed by like AI and then also people who are kind of just like shitting out their didactic fiction everywhere. But we didn't really get a ton of we didn't really get a ton of submissions at first. Like, it was a pretty slow trickle after like, I guess it's the initial group that we got of people being like, oh, this is a new listing on Duotrope. But we did start to get like a fair amount. I mean, we went through like 29 submissions for this first batch. Um, and then very recently, we ended up getting like posted on some kind of like places to submit speculative fiction fantasy and got listed as like the first one. I don't know why. Like
Yeah,
literally the very top.
it seems to be
Uh
like an unordered list of some point, but like,
yeah.
and I was like, oh, are these all going to be like random small ones? It's like Synthesized Sunsets, two other ones I've never heard of, and then the fourth one's like fucking uncanny. It's just like what? Uh, but yeah, so we got a fair amount from that. I mean, we got like I don't know, like 12 today or something.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So yeah. Um, but yeah, in general, I would say I've been like pretty impressed with the quality of the submissions.
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten a good amount of submissions, people who are published, and like we also haven't gotten a ton that are just like totally dog shit, which I was kind of expecting to get.
Yeah, and I would say like even of the ones which I would classify as like pretty low quality writing, I would say they're like not like slop, I guess.
Yeah, they're
Uh
interesting.
yeah,
Interestingly bad.
yeah. Yeah, I mean some like that are like extremely interestingly bad. Like this is kind of one of the things that's been most eye-opening is that like you do get to see just like pieces of fiction that you kind of just there'd be like no real way to interact with otherwise. Like, maybe someone would like be posting on their blog or something, but that is just like probably would be a very small blog that you would not read. And that, like, yeah, you can, like, read some stuff that's just objectively not that great writing, but has a lot of interesting ideas that you have never heard of, kind of. And I don't know. It's an interesting experience to read. You get to see some stuff you would, like, never see otherwise. And I'd say I've enjoyed it overall. But then, yeah, I mean, there's a number of stories, including the one we chose, that I just, like, actually thought were quite good and enjoyed.
I have been feeling a little bit of anxiety about not putting stuff out because, like, we actually have been growing a decent amount, and I'm like, wow, I haven't put out a real for real essay since, like, what, last season. I'm just like, man, I really just need to, like, put something out there. But yes, there will be an article this week, and we will be trying to ramp up in the future. I've actually been spending a lot of my mental bandwidth on fiction, somewhat unsuccessfully, but I have gotten some writing done, which is cool. It's better than nothing, and I definitely have maybe a bit more than I would like novel length story ideas. So we shall see what happens with that.
And yeah, I've also been. I mean, I have a short story, which is at this point long overdue. But will be coming in the next week. So yeah, that'll happen as well.
All right, so I think that'll about wrap things up for today. So to finish this off, Kevin, do you have any short story recommendations for us this week?
So at the convention, we met one of the editors of Radon Journal, and she recommended to me the story called 10207 by Emma Burnett. It's a very short story about like being a sort of like digital subject, which I wouldn't say it's like mind-blowing, but it definitely reminds me of a good like QNTM Sam Hughes story in a good way. I don't know if you've read if you've read like The Difference by Sam Hughes. It definitely has similar vibes, and I really want there to be more fiction like this in the world, and it was cool to see this in like flash fiction form.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.